Many of the wrong people, the socially undesirables, as they were referred to then, primarily Jews.
I'm just wondering if you have ever heard of these exclusionary admissions practices targeting religion.
No, definitely not. That's really surprising, actually.
No, I don't know anything about the Harvard quotas in the 1960s.
I have no knowledge of the Harvard quotas in the 1960s.
Before there was the Ivy League, there were the Big Three: Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. A degree from one of these elite universities would open the door for many opportunities. This wasn't the case for everybody. Harvard, Princeton, and Yale were called the Big Three because of their dominance in football, but there were many characteristics which linked these universities, namely their historical connection to white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. This meant that religious minorities, like Jews, were often excluded and mistreated when admitted. Anti-Semitic sentiment was high following World War I. It was in this context of general distaste towards Eastern European Jews that quotas in higher education emerged. Harvard is particularly well known for their use of quota, which limited the number of Jews admitted to Harvard in the 19th and 20th century. Their president, Abbott Lawrence Lowell, spearheaded this policy during his tenure from 1909 to 1933. Initially, the policy was to offer no scholarships to Jewish applicants, only tuition aid, in hopes that this would deter applicants. In 1922, scrambling for an explanation for his 15% cap on Jewish admissions, President Lowell explained to Judge Julian Mack that these quotas actually help Jewish students. When there are less Jewish students on campus, there will be less instances of anti-Semitism.
The Jewish population at Harvard was indeed growing. In 1900, 7% of freshmen were Jewish, but in 1909, that number had risen to 10%, 15% in 1915, 21.5% in 1922, and by 1925, the Jewish population at Harvard was up to 27.6%. Lowell wanted to cap that at 15%. The Jewish problem, as it was called, was not so much a problem in terms of scholarship or conduct. The worry was that non-Jewish students would be in too much contact with many Jews. Lowell wrote, quote, "Not because Jews of bad character have come, but the result follows from the coming in large numbers of Jews of any kind, save those few who mingle readily with the rest of the undergraduate body," unquote. In 1922, they added the following questions to their application: race and color, religious preference, maiden name of mother, birthplace of father, what change, if any, has been made since birth in your own name or that of your father. Explain fully. These questions, as well as less obvious ones, like which sports did you play in school, were used to determine if a student was Jewish or not. The idea was, as Peter Jacob reports, quote, to impose a higher standard for admission to the freshman class on members of the Hebrew race. After President Lowell's tenure ended in 1933, a new president was elected, James Bryant Conant. Conant's vision for admissions at Harvard was slightly different than Lowell's. He believed in what is called an ideology of meritocracy.
Then the new system that was introduced a new definition of merit that emphasized such subjective things as character, leadership, personality, extracurricular activities, and the new definition of merit reflected the power of the existing largely Protestant elite to impose a definition that would serve its interest and would have the effect of excluding a greater number of, quote, undesirables.
On June 4th, 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson gave the commencement address at Howard University in Washington, D.C. In this speech, Johnson set down the intellectual framework for a system now known as affirmative action.
You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberating, bringing up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair.
Months later, in September 1965, LBJ signed Executive Order 11246, affirming the federal government's commitment to promote the full realization of equal employment opportunity through a positive continuing program in each executive department and agency. However, the role of affirmative action on college campuses remained unclear until the Supreme Court case of Regents of the University of California versus Bakke.
The Bakke decision was 1974 or 78, if I remember right, in the 70s, and it still basically governs the law. So it was an attempt by a white individual who had been denied admission to Davis, arguing that he had been discriminated against based on race. And what the Supreme Court said in that case, and what they continue to say now, is that universities can take into account race, and they subsequently said gender, as part of their admissions policy, because it adds to the diversity of the school, and that's something that the school can determine is in their educational interest.
In the end, the Regents versus Bakke case decided that race can be used as a factor in the admissions process, but the use of quotas was ruled unlawful. Although it may seem like a given that Jewish organizations would support affirmative action, given the liberal bent of American Jews at the time, the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Congress, and the American Jewish Committee all submitted amicus curiae briefs opposing affirmative action admissions policies in support of Bakke. After a long struggle by the Big Three to rid nearly all institutions of higher learning and professional schools from numerous clauseless quotas, the reemergence of these quotas in any form was seen as a threat to the achievement-based society in which Jews had become one of the most successful ethnic groups in America. In Strangers in the Land, Blacks, Jews, and Post-Holocaust America, Professor Eric Sundquist writes about how many Jews were deeply involved in the civil rights movement. But they saw affirmative action based on their recent experiences with racial quotas as a discriminatory means of denying them access to education and employment, whereas African Americans saw affirmative action as the most effective way to counteract discrimination. The terms affirmative action and quotas are often entangled and are unable to be properly distinguished, a struggle that continues to exist today. However, the major Jewish organizations have drastically switched sides in the affirmative action debate, supporting the University of Michigan's affirmative action admissions policies in the Grutter and Gratz versus Bollinger case of 2003. Many scholars attribute this shift in opinion to Jews becoming seen as primarily white in America by the 1990s. In his book, The Vanishing American Jew, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz argues that Jews have become far more accepted in society and are generally less discriminated against. He argues Asians have now become the new Jews within higher education.
In Greg Kaplan's Guide to Getting into Elite Universities, he encourages applicants to omit from identifying with groups that are overly represented on college campuses.
Asian applicants seem to be competing against a system that's rigged against them. In order to be considered for positions, they have to prove themselves to be extra well-rounded and extra accomplished. In 2014, the nonprofit group Students for Fair Admission sued Harvard and University of North Carolina for using race-based affirmative action to exclude Asian American students. Notably, this group is claiming that Harvard is using the same exclusionary practices that they used against Jewish students in the 1920s.
Supporters of the group argue that Harvard admissions hold Asian American applicants to a higher standard than applicants of other races, so they use racial balancing to shape their incoming class. While Harvard has denied the results, an internal investigation showed that Asian applicants are rated with stereotypical language. A 2009 Princeton study showed that Asians had to score 140 points higher on the SAT than white students to have the same chance of admissions at top universities. Furthermore, data taken from 1993 to 2016 has shown that the Asian population in the United States has doubled, but the percentage of Asian students at Harvard fell by 50%, while the percentage of white students remained the same.
However, in states like California and Washington, where race-based affirmative action is illegal, The racial makeup of the universities do not accurately reflect the racial makeup of the states. Many universities use what's called holistic admissions to create a student body based not just on academic achievement, but overall student qualities.
So one of the biggest buzzwords that you'll hear people talking about in admissions is holistic application review, meaning that when universities are reviewing applicants, they're not considering only maybe like quantitative qualities. So they're not just looking at a GPA or SAT scores or AP scores or things like that. They're also looking at what kind of experiences a student is bringing to the table.
The issue with holistic review, however, is the subjectivity and lack of transparency in the process. As a result, implicit biases come into play when comparing students of the same race to one another. However, in order to pursue diversity, some sort of racial balancing seems unavoidable. Evidence suggests that Harvard is not using legal quotas against Asian students. However, due to the subjectivity of the admissions process, it is not unlikely that they are sculpting classes with race and gender in mind. So the question ends up being, should race be ignored completely in college admissions so only the most academically prepared students are accepted? Or should race be acknowledged as a factor so that historically disadvantaged races have opportunities to attend universities?
I've been able, luckily, to seek out through different student organizations and through sort of branching out in my friendships, a diverse community at GW, but I don't think that really occurs naturally here. But through that, I've felt more comfortable, being myself and growing into who I'm supposed to be.
My outlook on diversity at GW is mainly centered around the socioeconomic aspects because I'm a full scholarship student. In the past, especially freshman year when you're trying to fit in, couldn't go out to dinners with everyone or couldn't afford to live the lifestyle that they were living. And that was really hard, adjustment-wise.
My extracurricular activities have definitely been a little bit more skewed. I've noticed that I'm often one of very few people that represent a diverse community, and that can make me uncomfortable at times, but the way that I like to think about it is I'm kind of providing an open door to marginalized communities to enter that space with me.
What are your main takeaways from learning about Lowell's quotas on Jewish students, the history of affirmative action, and the current issue of discrimination in college admissions?
Yeah, I think what my main takeaway is definitely that although we might have thought that the quotas at Harvard were ridiculous and that would never happen today, I think we found a lot of similarities that apply over time, not only with Blacks and affirmative action in the 60s, but now with Asians today. So I think this issue is definitely still prevalent on college campuses.
I mean, I know at GW, we see they try to do the holistic admissions thing, but we see what really happens here, and the classes that end up here are not economically diverse. A lot of people are in the same class and status at GW.
Yeah, I think what it really the project makes me think about in general is, what does holistic review really mean? Is that just a buzzword used by admissions officers, or is that a genuine effort to try to get a really diverse class of students? And like you mentioned at GW, although they do implement this process, I don't think that we necessarily in our own experiences have seen that.
And I thought it was interesting too that we were never able to get a straight answer about what the value of diversity is. I think everyone feels that diversity is important, but they don't really know why or what it adds, or they can't articulate it very well. So I think that's interesting if we're gearing our admissions process to make universities or classes more diverse. We should have a good reason as to why diversity, what it adds to the experience and why it makes college a better place for everybody.
Yeah, I definitely love to see some research on that topic for a future project.
Yeah, for part 2 of our documentary.
Yeah, coming 2019.
No, we're graduating.